So we're up to the second chapter here, and this class is teaching you to be a CISM, which is a security manager. So there's a lot of MBA type management stuff in here, which is very difficult for me. I come from a highly scientific technical background, and management stuff is difficult for me to understand, but when I got the CISSP, I learned to appreciate management better. And it's very important to learn how to work with management. Many security professionals battle management, and you can't succeed that way. You have to get support from management. So we'll talk about governance and how it fits into an organization. That's today's topic, and we'll cover the second part of chapter 2 later, and next class. So governance is the process whereby they control business functions. So you can say we do something like we protect the data of our customers, but you haven't got governance unless you actually have an oversight process where some management actually checks to make sure, are you protecting the data? They do auditing, they do tests, they fill out reports. Then that's governance, where not only do you claim to do something, but you actually make sure you're really doing it right. And that is not easy, and there's a whole bunch of steps. Policies, objectives, authority, and monitoring, and this will make sure that what you really do matches your vision and objectives, which are what you want to do. So you focus on the key processes, and those are things like managing your personnel, the sources of the equipment and such that you use. Like we were saying, a lot of people are now very worried about using stuff from China. And U.S. military and U.S. government systems are pretty much banned from using stuff from China and having TikTok on it and so on. They're worried about the supply chain risks. And there are other risks. You have risk management. So instead of just doing risky things and not thinking about it, you carefully decide what risks are worth it and what countermeasures are necessary to limit the risks. You manage the configuration of your devices, and you manage changes. People don't just arbitrarily change things and foul up the network. You have to go through an approval process to make sure that whatever change you're trying to make, like going to another version of your development platform, make sure that that's actually going to not cause other problems. And access management, essential in both the physical and the real world, making sure that only authorized people can get at sensitive things. So vulnerability management is you scanning your network to find out if there is a vulnerability and dealing with it somehow. Typically running a scanner like a Nessus or something to see if there's a machine with an out-of-date software or an unnecessary open port or something like that. And then incident management. There was a time before 2010 when people believed in prevention in the world of computer security. They believed you could have firewalls and antivirus, and that meant there would be no malware and no intruders on your network. We all found out that was absolutely not true. China hacked everybody. They punched right through all the defenses, and now we've learned that you can't have that. You can buy all the firewalls and defenses you want, and the powerful bad guys will still get through. So now you have to have monitoring to detect when people have hacked you, and you have to incident management to respond to it when you have incidents. Just like you have other things you can't control. You can't stop employees from stealing the equipment. You can't stop fires from breaking out in the building. Instead, you accept that those things might happen, and you have fire alarms and HR controls, and you respond when they happen. All right, and this is part of the big category of business continuity planning. Small amateur businesses like a mom and pop restaurant just accept that if a disaster happens, like the building burns down, they'll just go out of business. But larger companies have to have responsibilities, and they make long-term partnerships with other businesses and the government, and it's not acceptable to just take that kind of risk. Instead, you make plans. If something bad happens, how will we survive? We will move to an alternate location. We will hire alternate staff so we can handle something like the pandemic or a fire or a major breach. That's business continuity planning. How do you survive a disaster? And so you have an establishment of an organization and clear statements of roles and responsibilities so people know what they have to do to achieve these things. So you're going to have to monitor your processes so you know what's going on and you know when things are not working. And then you have to have continuous improvement. This is the grand scheme of all modern compliance regimes. You state what you're trying to accomplish, you measure what you're actually doing, you figure out what the difference is, and you plan how to improve your processes, and then you go around an endless series of continuous improvement. This is necessary because the world keeps changing, and IT keeps changing, and the threats keep changing. So even if you're doing well now, you can't just leave your system static, or within a few years you'll be behind and you won't be doing well anymore. You have to keep moving just to stay up. This is what Bill Gates said when the US government sued Bill Gates and sued Microsoft around 98 or 2000 to try to split them up as a monopoly. He said, you don't understand. We might have 99% of the desktops right now, but we don't own them. We're running as fast as we can, and pretty soon we'll stumble, and we won't have that anymore. You don't need to break us up. And that's exactly what happened. Microsoft seriously stumbled. They never made it into mobile devices or phones, and those were taken over by Linux. And now almost everything is Linux and Unix, the iPhone, the Chromebook, and Microsoft Windows is only a small part of the computing world now. They made tons of money, but not from the desktop. They made tons of money from Azure, their cloud services. But it's absolutely true that they lost the ownership of the desktop. So that's the thing. You have to constantly keep running just to stay competitive in the modern world because everything changes so fast. So you got your business vision at the top. That's your grand scheme. Why does your company exist? Google's vision is to index all the world's information. So you have some grand statement of your purpose. Then you have strategies and objectives for business and for IT and for security. And down towards the details, you have the actual standards, which are the products you're going to use in your processes. And then you have the metrics I mentioned. You now measure to see, are you in fact achieving your goals? And the feedback of that goes back to these things, and you readjust these strategy statements to deal with the ways you need to improve because your metrics show that you're of course not perfectly achieving what you want to achieve. So here's what these things describe. Objectives are desired end states, and they should be in a measurable term. It shouldn't be completely vague. You should be able to somehow measure whether you have achieved your objective or not. And so your strategy is there, and your policy and priorities are there to guide you as you move towards it. Standards are the specific products you're going to use, what brand of antivirus, what content management system for your website, what development system like Git to handle your software you're writing. And then you have processes with instructions and controls. Controls are what enforces security. Things like passwords, two-factor authentication, card scanners, anything to enforce your security policy. And so you got programs and project management, and you have metrics and reporting, which report various measures of how well your system is working, so you can decide if you have to change it to improve it. All right, so that's security governance. Now, we were talking about general governance, which is just making sure that your business is doing what it should be doing. And security governance is particularly looking at security. Security has three components, and if you take the CISSP, you learn the history of this. At first, the only thing people thought about security was confidentiality, keeping secrets, but they discovered through the 60s and 70s that you actually need three things, and you can't have them perfectly: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Confidentiality means that private information is not being viewed by unauthorized personnel. Integrity means that data is not being altered by unauthorized personnel. And availability means that your services are available for the authorized users to use them. And it turns out that you cannot have a perfect level of all three of these. You have to choose which one is more important. For example, in this classroom, we have computers for students to use, and they all have the same password, CNET. So there is no confidentiality at all. If you log into this computer, you can just totally see what the last student did. And if you do something private on there, it's just exposed. What we've gone for is availability. It's easy for students to use, and therefore there's no confidentiality. And that's what you do. You choose which one of these things is more important to you, and you accept lower levels of the others. You can only have a certain level of these three things at any given price. If you're willing to spend a whole lot more money, you can get higher levels of them all, but whatever you do, you have to choose what level of these things to balance at your company. This is the part that frustrates a lot of people. They want to say, I want to be secure. Just sell me a security box that says secure on it. I plug that in, and now I'm secure. And vendors have been trying to sell that box for decades, and the fact is you can't do that. You can't even come close to doing that. I think they'll pass. The hall gets really noisy because of the echoes. Anyway, so you have to choose the priority of these things, and that's threat modeling. You have to understand what the risks are and what you're worried about, and then you can choose what level of those things are appropriate for your business. So risk management is limiting the risks. You have assessments to determine what risks you have, and then you have follow-up actions to reduce the risks that you choose to reduce. You improve your processes. You have ways to detect security incidents and respond to them. So if you do this correctly, then you will have improved degree of compliance with laws and regulations. And You'll have a higher degree of ability to withstand disasters, and you'll be able to metrics management where you're able to measure key security events like incidents, violations, policy changes, audits. All these things measure the security stature of your company so you can tell where you are and whether you're getting better or worse. Then you got resource management, allocating things in IT governments, and if this works correctly, you have increased trust from customers. One of my friends is the CEO of Cloudflare, a internet security company in San Francisco, and I really like that company because they have had several security incidents, and every time they immediately had a complete write-up. Within a day, they said, okay, we had a security problem, here's what caused it, here's how we fixed it, here's how we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. That's what you can do. Everybody gets hacked. The US military, Google, Yahoo, nobody is perfect, but what you have to do is impress your customers that you are efficient and you're on top of it and you communicate well. That's the kind of thing. You'll get increased trust from people if you have an effective security governance program. They can see that you actually handle it well. And that gives you a better reputation. There was a time, again, more than 10 years ago, when many companies would try to maintain the illusion that they never get hacked. And they said, if customers find out that our bank got hacked, they would all leave. Well, that's not true. Now everybody knows everybody gets hacked. There's no point, there's nowhere you can go that's not going to get hacked. Instead, you just need somebody that is intelligent at handling it, and they do the best they can. All right, so your security program aligns with your principles. You have a mission, which is the high-level description of why the organization exists. Then you have goals and objectives, what you're trying to accomplish right now, and strategy to accomplish those things. And there are other characteristics. One of them is culture. Culture is just what it's like to work there. Are people happy? Are they greatly stressed? For example, after Snowden leaked out the NSA secrets, the NSA established a policy that every person with access to the IT department at the NSA, every tech, has to go through a polygraph scan every 3 months. Morale plummeted. This is miserable. I mean, polygraphs are unreliable and terrible, but they trust them in the government to try to see who's no longer loyal, and everybody feels abused and spied on and stuff. This is bad. That's a culture, that's an unfortunate culture, a culture of paranoia and fear, which they didn't want, but it was what they felt they had to do after the Snowden revelation. The different companies have very different cultures, and this determines they have assets and determines what kind of risks are they allowed to take, what kind of legal obligations are there, and what are the market conditions. Companies vary greatly in how they deal with these things. One common culture mistake is the security professional Dr. No. Beginning security professionals often just say no. No social media, no personal devices, no playing games at work, none of that stuff. You just say no to everything. What happens is people can't put up with that, so they sneak around and break the rules. And now you've lost control. Now you've achieved less. If you had passed a reasonable rule that people can live with, then they might obey it. But if you just treat them with contempt and outlaw the things they need to get their job done, then you get shadow IT. Then people will just rent Amazon machines without the approval of the IT department and start putting data on there and doing their processes on there. And now you can't even make sure it's got security patches and stuff. This is the problem. If your rules are too strict, you will have less control than if you had rules that actually that help people do their job. You have to security people have to learn not to be the enemy of progress at the company. You're supposed to be helping people get their job done so we can all get our mission accomplished here. So your organization has its goals and objectives and a risk appetite. Some places are risk averse, like banks. They would cheerfully use 10-year-old technology, even though it's more expensive, because they trust it. They don't want to try anything new because a defect might be found. They say, let other people test stuff for a long time before we'll even touch it. That's a risk averse organization. Facebook is the opposite. Facebook is very proud of this. They have posters on the wall saying things like this: move fast and break things. They call their area hacker zone. They just say, try anything, put it right out there. You're supposed to be fun to work here. If you have an idea, just program it, put it on like a bulletin board for people to comment, which nobody looks at. If nobody comments for a few days, we'll just start rolling it out to like all the people in one city or something and see what happens. And if there's no disaster, we'll just spread it around. So if you have a smart idea, you can have fun and put it out there and people can start using it. That's a high risk acceptance at this company, because what matters is lots of exciting new features coming out, and they don't really care if it causes trouble and breaks other things and stuff like that. All right, so your role describes your expected activities. So there are roles like an IT auditor, engineer, accounts receivable, individual contributor. Each role has its own rules, and there's a lot of ranks, supervisor over a few people, up through managers and directors, vice presidents and presidents. The chief executive officer, which a lot of people think is the highest role in a corporation, but it is not. The highest role is the board of directors. This is what's wrong with Tesla, and for that matter, SpaceX. Elon Musk is selling his stuff as a meme stock. What he has done is very much like Donald Trump. See, Tesla sells for a valuation greater than all other car companies put together, which is completely insane. I mean, there are Teslas and they're good cars, but they're not 90% of the cars on the road. They're more like 10% of the cars on the road. There's no way that Tesla is worth more than Ford and GM and Volkswagen and everything all put together. But it sells at a ridiculous price because Elon Musk is a celebrity. And he always does something to make himself famous, to make himself in the news every day. Just a stunt, like Donald Trump, just a stunt to get in the news. And because he's famous, people bet on him. This guy, I'm going to bet on him, he'll make me rich. So they cheerfully bid the stock up to like 5 times what its actual value is, because just his celebrity makes it big. And that means he's basically a king. He's the CEO. Now, the CEO is supposed to be appointed by the board of directors, and the board of directors is supposed to be responsible to the shareholders. So if the CEO starts doing stupid, crazy things that degrade the brand, like buying Twitter and turning it into a Nazi hangout and lying about it and sort of humiliating himself, the board of directors can make him stop or fire him. This happened to Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs was in charge of Apple, and then he made disastrously bad decisions. He put out something called the Lisa that was garbage that nobody wanted to buy, and the board of directors pushed him out. He lost his company. He didn't own the company. I mean, the board of directors voted to replace him by another CEO. Later on, he came back, and he was back on his game, and he made the iPhone and was a huge success later in life. But for a period of time, he was pushed out of his own company by the board of directors. And that's what's supposed to happen, but it doesn't happen to Elon Musk-owned companies because they're afraid of him. He's a celebrity, so he gets to act like a king. But they are beginning to worry about it. Now they're beginning to say that his current bunch of really bad decisions probably come from his increased consumption of ketamine. And being the CEO of like major companies with enormous military importance like SpaceX and that are actually helping the war in Ukraine go, it is questionable. You really should be taking mind-altering drugs with no supervision or anything. The military is getting worried about it, the government's getting worried about it, and the board of directors is beginning to get worried about this. To what extent do you want to let this madman keep doing whatever he wants? Most companies, you can't do that. The board of directors tells you to shape up, and you have to be sort of boring and normal, like the head of Disney. Doesn't say crazy things, doesn't fight with Ron DeSantis, just has careful professional statements to steer the company to maximize shareholder value instead of maximizing drama and celebrity. However, you could argue that Elon Musk's celebrity is what causes shareholder value, and the stock is much higher. So, like Donald Trump, he raises interesting issues of having pretty much shattered the norms and yet accomplished something that shouldn't have been possible. What's that?
It's all for cloud.
All for cloud?
Cloud.
Sure, that's right. It's like influencers. Like you're just on TikTok and people watch your videos for no apparent reason, but you're rich because just your popularity feeds on itself. It's an interesting strategy, very different than the old-fashioned business strategy where it's just about the product and the price. All right, so you got responsibilities. Each person has their responsibilities to do things that fit in their description. And there are general responsibilities that apply to everyone, like obeying the information security policy and harassment policy and so on. And so there are charts. When you do something, RACI, whenever you do something, there's someone responsible for doing it, someone who's accountable to make sure it was done right, somebody who is consulted for help doing it, and someone who is informed, just so they know. And I remember I didn't see this form, but when I worked at an escrow agency, I was servicing legal clients. I knew this. Whenever people would ask me to do something disturbing, I would always send out an email CCing everybody, both sides, plaintiff and defense, and everybody, make sure everybody knew what was happening before I did something. That saved me many times. Lawyers will call you and try to talk you into doing something stupid. And you somehow, without any training, I had an instinct to know, rather than answering that question, let me send out an email and talk to my boss. And make sure I should be answering that question before I spill the beans about something. Anyway, so things like getting a user account, provisioning one, auditing it, these all have various people in these categories. People responsible for doing it, accountable for overseeing it, consulted for details about how to do it, and informed so just so they know what's going on. And there's other ways to draw that chart. All right, so when you're assigning roles, you consider people's skills, you consider segregation of duties. Important activities are not done by just one person. At the company I was at, we had a lot of distributions of money, and no one person could do that. You had to prepare the database, get ready to do it, and then it had to be reviewed by another person and signed off before any money went out the door. This is a common practice. That's segregation of duties. One person cannot do something really important alone. Two people must agree to do it. That helps cut down on mistakes and fraud. And then there's conflict of interest. You shouldn't have the ability to do something that you have an obvious interest in. You shouldn't be able to elevate yourself up to administrator. That should be somebody else's decision, otherwise. That's another mistake companies made for a long time. They would just have the network administrator had all power. And as companies matured, they realized that's not really true. The network administrator might know all about the network, but they really shouldn't have all power over like the finance and the personnel and stuff. All right, so let's try a Kahoot. These are quizzes in class just to keep people from falling asleep. And they're worth extra credit if you get it in the top 3. If I can get this thing to work. There we go. All right. All right, now let me just check and see if there are comments in the chat. Nope, nothing. Okay, good. All right. So this is 162A0. All right. So go to kahoot.it and type in that PIN number and a name, and you can play this game if you like. You don't have to do it. It's optional and extra credit, but it tends to wake people up. Especially with this management stuff, which can get really dull. Mostly because it's not real enough to me. I have only a vague idea about all these positions. I've never worked with these huge corporations. What's that? Language what? Yeah. You used the Kahoots? Oh, good, good. I learned about it from Cyber Patriot. That's the Air Force thing that used Kahoots. I thought it was pretty good. I used to use these hardware devices called iClickers whenever I was in class, but this is good because it extends to the remote attendees. All right. All right, so what part of the organization is at the top of the pyramid, guiding everything? That's your vision, the grand overall statement of what your business is there for. All right, what part of the organization provides feedback to other parts? The metrics measure how well you're doing, and that is used to feedback at several levels. All right, which artifact specifies desired capabilities or end states? those are objectives, things you're trying to accomplish. And what artifact drives a consistent approach to solving business challenges? Those are standards. You have your standard software and hardware products you use to do things in a consistent way. So I got Peter, this C, good. Probably enough information. There might possibly be 2 Peters, but my grader will figure it out as best she can. All right. So let's go back to here and try some more of this. All right. So the board of directors I mentioned, these are the people who actually run the company. They have a fiduciary duty. They're required to the shareholder. They're required to consider the shareholders and make sure that the company is making money for the shareholders. And they represent the investors, they have business experience, access to resources, and they appoint the CEO, and they can remove the CEO unless you have a dual shareholder company like Facebook, where the corporate structure is a modified one, where people cannot vote the CEO out. There is absolutely no way to get rid of Mark Zuckerberg. He cannot be removed, and therefore he can do something stupid like change the name of the company to Meta, and spend all their profits for like 2 years trying to go into the metaverse, which eventually turned out to be a complete disaster, and yet they can't push him out. That's a modern alternative corporate structure where the board of directors do not have this power. And a few companies are that way. Elon Musk did not do that. He regards that as, he is in principle fireable by his board, but he keeps them intimidated to where they don't dare do it. So that's kind of like Trump. He's proud of like taking a risk and proving he's better than everybody, and arguably he is. I mean, he is managing to dance on top of this celebrity thing for a long time. Yeah?
Why did Facebook needs board of directors then?
That's a very good question. That's a very good question, and I don't know. Someone could tell me. All I do is I listen to podcasts and find out what Scott Galloway says about it, which is a business professor from CERN. But he said, why is there even a board of directors at Facebook?
Why do we need the board?
It's a good question. Yeah. Yeah, I don't know what they do, but they don't have the role of a normal board of directors. It's they're operating diminished role. I suppose it's sort of like why they have lower government executives in Russia. Putin's the dictator, but there are other people, but they serve at his pleasure. And that's basically what it is. Zuck determines, so I guess he gives them things to do, but if he doesn't like what they do, he can just push them out. He's basically a king. And this apparently is a common technique now. People believe that tech wizards are so brilliant we should just give them infinite power, which is not the way American corporations were intended to run. Not at all. They were more like democracies, where you appoint people, and if they screw up, you push them out. No one person is supposed to be indispensable. That's a fundamental rule of business. But in the IT world, we've sort of abandoned that and have this worship of these founders that have all power. So here's 5 principles for directors indicating what people should do about cybersecurity. So directors should understand cybersecurity as an enterprise-wide issue and the legal implications of cyber risks, and the board should have sufficient cybersecurity expertise. This is the sort of thing that's added over the last few years. In the past, business executives were MBAs and you do not much about technology and not much about cybersecurity, but now everybody's realized it's really important, and you have to have it built in your structure at every level. So the executive management carries out directives from the board of directors, and then they'll have other people beyond the CEO, like the Chief Information Officer, Chief Technical Officer, and Chief Information Security Officer. Each company will have different ones of these, but this is the C-suite, the C-level people who make top-level decisions about things. So the executive management determines the policy, publicly supports it, leads by example, and has the ultimate responsibility. This is the thing, if you are an executive, you are responsible for what the people under you do. If the people under you do the wrong thing, it is your fault because you hired them, you were supposed to train them, you were supposed to fire them, you were supposed to review their work, you know. You are responsible for what actually gets done. So the Security Steering Committee controls risks at your company, does risk assessments. They consider new laws and regulations and security incidents. And the business process and business asset owners are business people that oversee part of the company, watching things like access grants, configuration of devices, your functions and processes, maintaining the physical environment. These people will be responsible for some portion of it, like the physical buildings. And that's also custodial responsibilities. This is taking care of something, custody. These are not necessarily the people that clean the floor. These are people who have a certain amount of custody. So they implement decisions from the asset owner. So, for example, there will be an asset owner that owns your servers, and there will be custodians who do things like update and back up the servers. And they perform the activity, but they're overseen by the owner, who is the person responsible for maintaining that asset. And one important rule is you can outsource work, but you cannot outsource responsibility. And one egregious bad example is Equifax. Equifax got hacked about 10 years ago or 8 years ago because they just didn't put on a patch for the part of their web product. And the CEO tried to say, well, it was this IT guy's fault for not putting on the patch. And that does not fly. That totally does not work. You are responsible for what really happens. If your staff is an idiot and does the wrong thing, then they say, well, why did you hire the idiot? Why didn't you train the idiot? Why didn't you replace the idiot? You're responsible for what really happens. You can't say, oh, my staff did the wrong thing, it's their fault. Well, that's true, and you can fire them, but that doesn't mean that you didn't screw up. As the executive, you were supposed to monitor your staff and make sure they didn't do terrible things like that. You cannot escape responsibility. All right, so the Chief Information Security Officer is the highest ranking security person, and there's a lot of similar ones like Chief Risk Officer and so on. Have a similar role. So they report to a C-level executive like the CEO. And some organizations don't have a security officer. For example, Facebook and Twitter didn't for a really long time, had 0 security staff. At some point, they had to hire it, although Elon Musk probably fired him again. Anyway, some people have a consultant. They bring in a virtual CISO on a part-time basis to provide this. A lot of people have outsourced security solutions like that. So your security manager is tactical. You have a security director, a vice president, and CISO, these various people at different levels setting the tone of your company. And your chief privacy officer is what you'll have if you handle a lot of private data and you decide you want to really make sure you're protecting it, which is increasingly important with the GDPR in Europe and the CDR in California. The laws are getting stricter about protecting private data, and so companies are getting more motivated to work harder at protecting it. HIPAA protects health data, and these other acts also control what you're allowed to do with private data. So you got software development, of course. You got your coders and your architects and your testers and so on. This is getting a lot of attention now because of the SolarWinds attack, when Russia poisoned the supply chain of a major product, so people would put on the official update from the official source, and it was full of Russian malware, and got almost every company in America owned and government agency, and probably most of them are still owned, even years later, because once they're in, they put all other junk in there, and it's hard to get it out. And that's because they didn't secure their software development platform well enough. So this is now receiving a lot of attention. How well do you actually secure your software development processes? Are you really sure that nobody is putting bad stuff in there? And this makes it hard for open source. When people use open source products like curl, nobody even knows who wrote it. It's an open source community. Some random guy in Finland put up this update. It wasn't reviewed by a board of directors or anything. So how do you know they didn't put malware in that? How do you really know? How do you know that for any of your open source products? And yet almost everything uses open source products and open source libraries. Everyone is currently struggling with this issue. Then there's data management. You have database administrators and various other people handling data at different levels. And your network, of course, your network engineer and other people designing and maintaining your network. You got your systems, other systems out there like storage systems and servers, and you have operations and controls over your operations, and your security operations. You've got people at lower levels that do things like examine logs and define access, and then people at higher levels like a security architect designing the large-scale structure of your security systems. Then you have audits. In order to achieve compliance with any of the standards, you have to go through periodic audits, and you have to do them anyway. You need to audit security, so there you can get a CISA, which is another credential well worth getting, like the CISM that this class points to. This makes you qualified to be an auditor, and an auditor is a good job. By the way, these management auditing type jobs are considered kind of dull compared to an exciting field like pen testing or incident response, but it means you get to go home at 5. You have a regular job, you can have a home life. You know, your job is not a constant emergency. It's like HR or taxes. It's just steady work, but it's got to be done. And audit is an important function at companies. Then you got service desk, of course, to help people with their technical problems, and quality assurance at many levels, checking the quality of your software. And all your staff has general responsibilities, like the acceptable use of assets, proper judgment, not falling for people that call you on the phone and ask you for passwords and stuff, and reporting of security incidents to management. You have to have usual annual training your staff in their responsibilities so they know what everybody's responsibility is. And then you have monitoring responsibilities where you just measure what's happening at your company, metrics, performance evaluations. You can have feedback from peers, comparing your job titles with other organizations, just various attempts to measure what's going on at this company and is it really what it should be or not. And then you have information security governance metrics. You can have technical metrics that show your security devices like your firewalls, and then business related metrics that measure how well are you achieving your business goals. And then what everybody would like is to specify the return on security investment. If we hire a CISO and make sure they have the right certifications and give our staff awareness training, how much money will that save us? And the problem is nobody knows. You would like to say, you would have been hacked 5 times, but now you're only going to get hacked 4 times, so that'll save $1 million, but it's not that simple at all. You can buy all the best stuff and still get hacked. You can do nothing and not get hacked for a while. So you do it, it's sort of a hand-wavy argument, saying, well, other ways to justify security are like you have responsibility, there's regulation, you have to do what the competitors are doing, since you can't actually calculate the return on investment and prove that you earned money from security. This is a big problem in our industry. It's really an art more than a science. We can't really measure your security level and then figure out how many dollars that turns into, where it's not that scientific at all. There are people try to find these smart metrics, things you can measure that are useful and timely, and you can make them that help you predict future risk and so on, and that will help you get a sort of relative statement. We're more secure, we're less secure, but boiling it down to dollars is something we don't know how to do yet. And we probably never will, because the enemy is intelligent. It's crime, so if you did figure out what the bad guys were doing, they would just change it. All right. Okay, let's try another one of these. 2A1, and all right. One point I was writing one of these, we didn't have this product and I coded my own in like PHP or something. I was trying to put the Jeopardy music in it, but anyway, I didn't get that far. Then this thing came out, which is much nicer and prettier than the one I made. But that was when I first was teaching online. I wanted some way to have a system like this, so I made a simple little PHP script that would do it, sort of. But it wasn't as much fun as this, didn't have the pretty pictures and stuff. Yeah, well, oh yeah, I also made a scoreboard for CTFs used in a lot of my classes. It's like 30 lines of PHP, you know, you don't need much if you make a simple product. All right. All right, so if a DDoS attack brings down your server, what part of security has failed? That's failure of availability. Yeah, they didn't steal your data, but your server is no longer able to provide service to the authorized users. All right, what aspect of security is the most important? It varies everywhere, just like if you think about police. There's not one thing they do to make your town safe. Every town has its own problems, and they do whatever they have to deal with the problems in your town. So you have to decide for yourself what an appropriate mixture of these things would be to achieve sufficient security for your business. All right, what is the A in RACI? Accountable, it's responsible, the person responsible for doing something, accountable, their manager for making sure they can do it, consulted, somebody who might be able to help, and informed, somebody who just should know what's happening. That's what it is, the levels of oversight over an activity. So that's accountable. All right. All right, and what principle prevents an asset owner from controlling their own access permissions? Right, that's a conflict of interest. You can't be responsible for giving yourself more power. That's what Trump tried. It has to be somebody else deciding whether you deserve more power. Otherwise, that's not governance. That's not management. All right. Jason T. and Chris C. Jason T. and Jake Green. All right, good. Down here. Okay, good. So I'm going to stop this recording.